People who specialise in amphibians here, and 30% have gone extinct or nearly extinct through chytrid alone. We're so used to being barraged with negative conservation stories, but that's not why this is so important right now. It's so important at this moment because we can make the biggest change now. It's galvanising us. It's giving this reason of hope, this power, this sense of stewardship that we really can make a difference. I was talking with Jane last night, and she said, as things become more difficult, it just makes us try that little bit harder. It's an exciting time. We can do things we could never do before. And the idea that each and every one of us is a conservationist right now will enable us all to make that little bit of a difference. It's an exciting point. So, we've got a whole range of wonderful speakers today. But first, our initial speaker, our plenary talk of today doesn't need an introduction. But Dr. Jane Goodall started her research many years ago now in Gombe in Tanzania and changed the way we thought, not only about primates, but about the animal world as a whole. Moving on from there, Jane later saw that it wasn't enough just to do the research in its own capacity. She decided to go out and engage and bring the people in because they can make the biggest difference themselves. And what started with just a few students across Tanzania has turned into a global network of driving change. And I know there are lots of roots and shoots people here today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well, what a great welcome. And, you know, it's early in the morning, and I'm sure some people were partying last night. So, you know, let's have a rousing, and anybody who can join in this. This is how chimps greet the day. And, you see, that's my signature trademark. I like to begin that way. Well, you know, it did really, my career as such began when I was watching a hen and wondering where the egg came out when I was 4 years old. And I apparently waited 4 hours in the hen house, and I actually saw where the egg emerged. So that was my first experience in observing animals. And anyhow, this love of animals led me eventually to save up and go to Africa. Hadn't been to college because we didn't have enough money. So I got to Africa, and there I was fortunate enough to meet the late Louis Leakey, and this is now history. He offered me the opportunity to go and study chimpanzees. And gradually, over the years, it became obvious that there is no sharp line dividing us from the rest of the animal kingdom. It's a very blurry line. And yet, when I came to Cambridge, because Louis Leakey said, Jane, you have to get a degree. There's no time for a BA. I've got you a place in Cambridge University to do a PhD in ethology, and I didn't even know what ethology was. And when I arrived at Cambridge, it was thought at that time, 1962, that the difference between us and other animals was one of kind. And I was talking about the personalities of the chimpanzees I'd come to know. I was talking about the fact that they had emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, that they had a good intellect and could solve problems, and that they had personalities. And I was told by many of the professors here that this was wrong, my science was wrong, animals should be numbered, and these other attributes were unique to us. Well, fortunately, I'd learned as a child from my dog that that wasn't true. And I had an amazing supervisor, and it feels very strange to come to Cambridge with no Robert Hind here. But he managed to steer this ignorant, naive young woman through the hurdles so that I got my PhD, whilst managing to hang on to my conviction that the scientists who told me that animals were so different were wrong. And back in Gombe, I built up a research station. It was the most amazing time in my life, because I had time to be out in the rainforest. I could feel the interconnectedness between all the different species in the rainforest and how each one had its role to play, and each one mattered. And time with the chimps, built up a research station. Fantastic students came. I could talk to them in the evenings. And why did I leave? I left because in 1986, at a conference in the US, we brought together all the people who at that time were studying chimps in about, I think it was 6 or 7 different parts of Africa. And it was a shock. I think it was a shock to all of us to find that everywhere where people were out in the field, chimpanzee numbers were dropping, forests were disappearing. There was the beginning of the bushmeat trade, the commercial hunting of wild animals for food, the live animal trafficking, mothers shot to sell their infants. And there was the logging companies coming in and human populations growing, and it was grim. And I went to that conference. By then I was a scientist with a wonderful life, and without making any conscious decision, I left as an activist. I knew I had to try to do something. I had no idea what I could do. I went to Africa, and I managed to get enough money to go to 6 range countries. And yes, I did learn more about the chimpanzees, but I also began to learn about the plight of so many of the people living in and around the forest areas. And this came to a head when I flew over the little Gombe National Park. It's only about 30 square miles. Originally, it was part of the equatorial forest belt. And when I flew over in 1991, I was shocked to look down and see a little oasis of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. And if I had photographs, I'd show you, but you couldn't look them up on the internet. They were bare. There were more people living there than the land could support, struggling to survive, cutting down the forest because they had to try and feed their families. And so it was at that time that I realized unless we help the people to have better lives, there's no chance of saving the chimpanzees. And we began a project called Take Care, or Takari, that's the Jane Goodall Institute. And starting with what the people in the villages thought we might do to help them, that's where we began. We got small grants, and the program became successful. I have no time to go into the details. Again, you can look it up on the internet. But it was so successful that the villagers have now become our partners. And they are setting aside land for restoration. The trees in that part of the world, anyway, are very resilient from seeds left in the ground. The trees have now sprung up. There are no more bare hills around Gombe. We began with 12 villages. We're now in 52. Around Gombe, we're restoring the forest. Down in the south, we're protecting the forest and its chimpanzees. And this is so successful that this program is now starting in 6 other African countries. So all of this, of course, takes a lot of money. And so I began traveling around because people wanted me to come and talk, and I thought, well, I can raise awareness too about what's going on in Africa and the problems we face there, at the same time as trying to raise some funds. And of course, then I began learning more and more about what I already knew something about, and that is what we are doing to this planet, what we're doing to Mother Earth. And here you come to the big difference between us and chimpanzees, the explosive development of our intellect. So how bizarre that the most intellectual creature to ever walk on planet Earth is destroying its only home. And I don't need to explain to you who are here today what it is that we're doing. But we are recklessly using the finite natural resources. And soon we shall get to a point of no return. Soon the doomsday scientists will be proved right. But as Ben says, we have a window of time. And in that window of time, it's up to each and every one of us to try and make change. And some people are in a much more better position to make that change than others. But we can all do our part. And the lucky thing for me is, I'm traveling 300 days a year all around the world. And it's pretty exhausting, and it's pretty grim. Make no mistake, I see areas that have been devastated. And when you see piles of elephant tusks in some, government confiscation area, and when you see forests razed to the ground. It's grim, but at the same time, everywhere I go, I'm meeting amazing people who are fighting to save a species, whether it's animal or plant, who are fighting to restore an environment, who are fighting to clean a river. And you'll hear about some of those things today. So there are these amazing projects and these incredible people everywhere I go. There is much more awareness now than there was 10 years ago. And it's a bit sad that not enough people are changing their behavior. And that's partly because people feel, what can I do? I'm one person, there's so many problems in the world. And they feel helpless and hopeless. And I realized as I was traveling around that so many young people, high school students, university students, young people out in their first jobs, they felt the same. And I talked to them, and they said, well, we feel this way because you've compromised our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. We have compromised the future of young people. You hear this saying, we haven't inherited this planet from our parents, we've borrowed it from our children. We haven't borrowed from our children, we've stolen, and we're still stealing their future. And we now have to get together around the world and help our young people to restore some of the harm that we've inflicted. So it was because of this that I began our Roots and Shoots program back in 1991 in Tanzania with 12 high school students who came to me concerned about all kinds of different problems in Dar es Salaam. They were worried about the street children sniffing glue who had no homes. They were worried about the cruel treatment of domestic dogs, stray dogs. They were worried about the destruction of the coral reefs. They were worried about why isn't the government prosecuting the poachers who are killing elephants and giraffes in our national parks. And so I told them to get together friends who felt the same, and we had a meeting, and from that meeting, this program, Roots and Shoots, was born. And right from the beginning, the main message was the message that Ben delivered so eloquently earlier: every single one of us can make a difference every single day. And it may seem that the choices we make, what we buy, what we eat, what we wear, make no difference in the sum of things. And if it was just one person making ethical choices, it wouldn't make any difference. But the cumulative effect of hundreds, then thousands, then millions, and eventually billions of people all making ethical choices will start to move us towards the kind of world that we can pass down to our children with a little bit of pride. Right now, we can't. So from the start, because I have always understood the interconnectedness of all living things and all problems too, it was decided that the Roots and Shoots groups would tackle 3 different projects, which they would choose themselves. It was not going to be a top-down, this is what you do. No, this is going to be a group of young people. What are you passionate about? Okay, some of them are passionate about animals. Some of them are passionate about the environment and the pollution and the litter. Some of them are passionate about the fate of the people around them. And so from the start, every group chooses 3 projects: animals, people, environment. It doesn't mean every member of the group has to do all of it, but they do have to share the results of their projects. And I can tell you the difference this is making. From those 12 high school students, when we began in 1991, Roots and Shoots is now in 98 countries and growing. And we have members from kindergarten, even a few preschoolers, very strong in university, everything in between. And it's even beginning to slowly move outwards into older people, so that we have some very successful programs for old people, retired people. We have programs that are working really well in prisons and among the staff of some big corporations. But basically it's youth-driven. And it's everywhere I go now, there are young people with shining eyes wanting to tell Dr. Jane what they've been doing to make this a better world. They are inspired and they understand the problems, And because we listen to their voices, they are empowered. And so I say Roots and Shoots is making a difference. Let me give you one example. I've been going back and forth to China since 1993. And when I first went, nobody was talking about the environment. In fact, they weren't allowed to by the government. And there was not much concern for animals, a lot of cruelty around. But gradually, as Roots and Shoots has spread, there's about 2,000 groups in China now. And I've seen over the years how attitudes have changed. And so just on this last trip before Christmas, there were so many people saying, well, of course I care about the environment. I was in Roots and Shoots in primary school. Of course I care about animals. I was watching your National Geographic documentaries about you and the chimps when I was in primary school. So Roots and Shoots has had some impact on changing attitudes in a country like China. You all know they've banned the sale of ivory by the end of this year. They've closed down the factories where the ivory ornaments were carved. They're building a huge, what they call a bird airport. It's merely a huge area on the main migration route of birds through China, where they've got wetlands and it's going to have a big education center. So it really has made a difference. But I think, you know, one of the most important things is to realize what we are doing that's so important. And we're doing it because of what I call the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle the impossible and won't give up. And it's led to change in so many different areas. It's led, as I've said, to people fighting on the ground to save species and to restore habitats. It's led to the development of some innovative technology where we actually, if governments would subsidize clean, sustainable energy instead of still clinging to their old buddies in the fossil fuel industry, we could be free of fossil fuels and all the resulting pollution. But, you know, we have a long way to go, and another responsibility of ours is, if we really care, then we mustn't buy products from companies and industries that are polluting. We need to write to our governments. We need to make our voices heard. And through social media now, we can do this in a way that was never possible before. We can gather hundreds of thousands of people around the world to coordinate and express what they're feeling about a single issue. So today is Earth Day. It's a day when around the world people are marching for science. And of course, science has been receiving a battering in the United States. And so our Roots and Shoots groups, indeed, all around the world are taking part in these marches for science. And eventually, if enough of us get together and make our voices heard, it will lead to governments and business changing. But we must play our parts. So I think I want to end up, there's an awful lot more to say, but I hope that some of you visit the Solutions Fair. We have a Roots and Shoots booth there. I'm sure that during today you're going to be inspired, because I know that some of the people giving talks are very inspirational and their projects are very inspirational. I wish I had a lot more time. I'd love to talk about some of these projects. And it was these inspirational people and amazing programs that I encountered that led me to write the last two books. One is Hope for Animals and Their World, where every chapter is about a species that wouldn't be with us if it wasn't for these people who said, no, not on our watch. And the second one, Seeds of Hope, which is about the plant kingdom. And what an amazing journey for me that was. And how incredible are these plants and trees. The fact that trees can communicate with each other by pheromones and by microfungi in the roots. I mean, we've got so much to learn. And I always say when I'm in a university, if anybody wants to study animal behavior or plants today, it is the most exciting time in my whole 83 years, because you can now study things about animals which I couldn't have studied because I was told they didn't exist. Animals didn't have emotions. They didn't have ability to reason, and they didn't have personalities. Now you can study those things, and we're finding out so much. It's a very exciting time. And I want to end with I think the video is 3 minutes, just to show it's not only humans who have this indomitable spirit, it's other species too. And this is a little video about one of the chimpanzee orphans that we've taken into our 2 big sanctuaries in Africa, whose mothers were mostly killed for the bushmeat trade. And it's about a chimpanzee who twice came close to death, once when her mother was shot, another time when she had a terrible disease, and was saved by the first blood-to-blood chimpanzee blood-to-blood transfusion in Africa by our wonderful veterinarian, Rebecca. So I want to end with this little 4-minute video, which kind of takes me back to my roots. Some of you will have seen it, but you won't mind seeing it again. This is a really exciting moment for me. The Jane Goodall Institute's Chimpunga Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center in the Republic of Congo has for years been caring for infants whose mothers were killed, mostly for the illegal bushmeat trade. Many of them are now fully grown. Recently, we acquired 3 large forested islands on the beautiful Kwilu River, where we can release many of the chimpanzees from our overcrowded center. In here is Wunda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead. And here she is about to come out into this paradise. She's the 15th chimpanzee to get her freedom here. And we hope ultimately to have about 60 on the island. Today is the first time I've met Wunda. I talked to her on the boat, trying to reassure her. She must have wondered what was happening. None of us could predict exactly what she would do once the cage door opened. It was a very, very touching moment. One of the most amazing things that's ever happened to me. The warmth of her embrace is something I shall never forget. For Wunda and all the other chimpanzees we're working to bring here, Chinzula Island will provide a wonderful forest home where they will be cared for and safe. Let me just tell you, Wunda is an amazing female in many ways. All of our females are on birth control because, you know, we've already got 67 chimpanzees and it's very expensive. One of the females, just one, the implant went wrong, and that was Wunda. Wunda is now the alpha female of a group of 30, including adult males, although that will change. She had her baby successfully, and we've called that baby Hope. So there is hope for the future. And I can't stop without thanking all the staff and volunteers of the Jane Goodall Institute, you know, including Ben and others who are here today. If there was time, I'd tell you all their names, but I'd be in big trouble from Ben, and he's not my waiter anymore. So, you know, anyway, so thank you all for listening. And, you know, don't forget, every single day, every single one of us makes some kind of difference, and we have a choice. What kind of difference are we going to make? Thank you.